first people to arrive in the savanna-like Verde Valley were the Paleo-Indians. Although the exact date is unknown, it's estimated they arrived sometime between 11 and 12,000 BC. These Paleo-Indians were hunters of large game such as mastodon, woolly mammoth, saber-toothed cats, bison, camels, and giant sloths that roamed over wide areas. Sometime after about 4000 BC, archaic hunter-gatherers began to enter the area. They were the Verde Valley's longest occupational group. While these people relied heavily on wild game, they had an increased dependence on plant resources. Their settlement patterns were semi-sedentary, and they migrated in tune with the seasons in their hunt for plants and game. Sometime around 650 AD, a culture of people archaeologists refer to as the Sedona began to make their presence known here in the valley. By the beginning of the 11th century, they began to construct large masonry structures, many of them on hilltops, and more than likely defensive locations. It's the remnants and ruins of these structures that are most visible in the area today. Many of these sites are recognized by the Hopi tribe as their ancestral locations. By 1450, as with many areas around the American Southwest, and for reasons still unclear, the Sedona abandoned the area.
I first became a docent here at the Verde Heritage Site in the winter of 2004. And during the training, they would explain the various rock art images on the wall. But of course, they would not explain all of them because there are over 1,000 images here. But during the time as a docent, people would ask in particular about the 7 concentric circles that look like bullseye that come across the panel. And in doing my independent research, I found that they were often referred to as sunfather images and sometimes used to make calendars with sun and shadow effects. And so we began to watch more closely these images as the year progressed. Lo and behold, in the spring of 2005, we observed that the boulders up above that you see produced 2 shadows as the sun crests the bluff that go all the way down to the ground and became in perfect alignment with 3 of the concentric circles. At that point, we assumed we had a solar calendar. We continued to watch and observe the site for the full year and observed that it was actually recording every month of the year, and especially the solstices and the equinoxes, as well as planting times. But the big mystery was the boulders that are up above. Were they in fact naturally occurring? Were they enhanced in any way? Were they in fact placed there? And to do that, we would need to get up close and personal to those boulders. And in the spring of 2011, the Forest Service granted us an archaeological research permit that permitted us to erect scaffolding at the face of the bluff in order to see up close what was going on with the boulders that produced the sun effect.
Children playing off. You need a grip on these sidebars all the time.
Absolutely.
Really?
Show me again. Show me again. So this is a fault plane that splits into two pieces. One side goes up and one side is straight. And it kind of curves slightly with a bifurcation on it. But that gives the smooth face. So anything that we see sticking out has been frost heaved.
Although, could I ask a question? It also could be enhanced. In other words, it could be humanly
It may have been.
pushed out a little bit. Do these stones create any shadows?
Oh yeah, these are the main ones.
Okay.
These two are the key. This is the one that holds that for an hour, so this is the edge. We were trying to decide. This was the one that holds the shadow for almost an hour. Okay. So the curve has to be relative to the arc of the sun. So both of these are what produce the shadow effects. On the spring and fall equinoxes, as the sun hits the two boulders, they throw down two shadows across the concentric circles and put three of them tangent to the shadow line, and only on the equinoxes. Since the sun at this time of the year is moving rather rapidly, if you come the day before or the day after the equinox, they will not be in perfect alignment. On the summer solstice, the sun is the highest in the sky, so the shadow lines are almost straight down. And what we noticed was that as they moved across the panel, they were in fact again a tangent to two concentric circles. But the biggest surprise was that the shadow line stopped being tangent to two figures that appeared to be dancing figures, because when you look up close, they each have two little feet at the bottom of their lines, with an asterisk in the arched areas representing the sun. So they are dancing to the sun on the summer solstice.
If you look at the rocks in this area, oftentimes it's covered with a black patina, very thin, and that's composed typically of manganese oxide, maybe a little bit of bacterial growth and algae growth. And that patina basically masks the color of the rock. And so prehistoric people would easily seek those sites out, and that'd be an ideal place to make a petroglyph. So they took advantage. Anytime they would see these patina-covered rocks, they would take advantage of that and carve their petroglyphs into it. So I think some of the most ancient ones probably go back 10,000 years, but most of the petroglyphs, like in the V-bar-V, are probably, less than 2,000 years old. So these are very durable rocks, very solid, and we're in what's called the Schnebly Hill Formation. This is a sandstone, Permian age, perhaps about 270 million years old.
Now, what's weird to me, this little edge here, that's pink,
Here?
to the right,
Here.
that produces a second shaft of light
that may have been
late in
chipped.
the summer. Yeah, and that's one of the things we wanted to determine, was that chipped purposely, because that definitely, it produces that second shaft of light that starts around April. It gets longer and longer and longer until July 8th. It goes down to almost to the center and perfectly frames the two dancing figures on July 8th, which is when the Hopi do their home dance. So you got these two dancing figures perfectly framed by that second shaft of light from that chipping spot.
This stone seems very suspicious to me. It's sticking so far out, further than any other stone on the entire face of the whole cliff here.
This is the natural face that was once there.
Right.
And my guess is that this is entirely a natural phenomenon, all three of these blocks. Nobody could have moved this to that extent, that precariously. That's literally in danger of collapsing.
What about this? See how that flat part that's back here? This flat part? That's
Yeah.
attached to this.
Well, I realize, but that's the back side of this block, I think. I don't think that's a natural fracture.
But it's attached to this.
That's correct. Yep.
So you think that's just a natural fracture? This just happens to have fallen there?
Yeah, both of these have come out.
Okay.
Both of these have come out because that's what's holding this in place.
Right.
And if that fracture ever breaks, this thing is
Oh, yeah, it's coming down.
Is history. But my guess is that whatever fit in front of this thing has long gone down. There was a block out in front of this that is gone. All three of these have been frost heaved out along natural fractures. That part is pretty clear to me. And touching it is a no-no.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
The one thing I'm interested in is the actual form here. It's part of your pattern process, right?
Yes.
So the edge. So the question in my mind would be, has this been modified in any way this way? Because you see that it's pretty sharp here, but this is flat, and this is semi-concave. So these edges almost looked work to me here a little bit. See, this would be the normal erosion where it would be pointed. See how it's pointed?
Yeah.
But this, it looks awful flat here.
Possibly.
In fact, all the way back to there, and then it's round, and then it's sort of flat again there. So that section to me looks...
Put your finger back up there again.
Right in there. So that looks suspect to me, that portion there. Because the normal weathering process is going to be a sharp edge like this. Because the way it's come out.
Well, yeah, but the weathering of the sandstones, they tend to round off with time, so that's...
But not in the flat. See how you have a sharp edge here?
Yes.
And then you have this, and see how
Yeah,
that
I
section
agree,
there?
I agree.
And here, it just seems a little incongruous with the
Yep.
rest of the weathering process.
Yeah.
So
What is puzzling as well is that these are stream boulders. Those are quartzite boulders that are...
Which should not be in there.
They possibly, that has been enhanced by man.
Yes, well, and I can tell you, Ken, from my own experience at Holcomb sites, I'm finding a lot of rock art panels have river-rounded cobbles that have been put there as some kind of offering.
Yep.
And so, you know, this actually could be a water object that's intentionally placed in that crack as some kind of offering.
Because that should not be located at that spot
No,
naturally.
it's a manuport, what we call manuport.
Manuport?
Yeah. In other words, it's a natural rock that's been brought in. It's not geologically induced to its location. It's called manuport. So my conclusion would be to agree that these stones originate from here, these three stones. But it's still some question in my mind if they haven't been moved slightly beyond what the natural geologic process has created. In other words, this obviously is fractured off of here. This was further back in there, but whether it was pulled out a little bit further by humans is probably not something that we could say with any
I don't think
definitive.
Yeah, it would be very difficult to, because that's so precarious, even now. And if that still fits, how old would you say that these alignments were made? How long ago?
Well, the concentric circles are higher up, which Peter generally says were done later, and their patination is a little brighter than the rest, so clearly it's later. So I've always been saying probably around 1200, 1100, somewhere in the later period of the Sedona.
So this means that this rock has been, since it fits the petroglyph, or
Still today.
It means that that's been stable for a
800
period of
years.
time.
800 years.
Yeah. Doesn't mean it'll be another 800 years, but
I don't think so.
This is, it really looks precarious to me. Because these, you see these subtle fractures like you see here?
yeah.
They exist throughout all these rocks, and when you have them weather, you can see how the fracture, even though it's a micro fracture, will enhance the rounding on each side. All of those things are enhanced by modern weathering, and the fracture on the back side of that has to be one of these things that is already a microfracture through that rock. So water getting in there and freezing and thawing, ultimately that's going to come crashing down. I mean, in geologic time, you know.
I would suggest that you have some wedge stones in here. These here, they've been put in there to create tension so that it doesn't move.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So whether these are unmodified and in situ, they've come up here and they've wedged other stones in to make sure they stay that way.
Yep.
And they don't move.
Yep.
Because you can imagine the effort to create a calendar rock, and then you get 1 inch of movement, it's going to throw everything off.
That's right.
So what they've done, they've come up here to make sure there's no movement that occurs. So that much I feel pretty confident in saying.
I agree.
And what's really interesting is this little piece right here, which is small but would have a great effect because it's a wedge form, and pushed down into there, and then almost like it was snapped off, would definitely create a lot of tension. So you have a tiny little rock actually is going to create a lot of tension and would be very effective. You agree with that? Even that little tiny one is going to be very effective. And then we can't see further back, but it looked like there's a whole series of stones that have been put in there, not just these 3 up on top, but there's ones under them, and they may actually be jammed in there as well.
These rocks act like concrete. They're very, very strong under compression, but they're very weak under tension. And so when you have jammed rocks like that, they tend to cement themselves. They get stronger. So
I would concur, this is very precarious.
if this thing does come out, I'll tell you what's going to happen here. If this crashes down, this and this this is going to come out. This may stay, but this is going to shape. It's going to change position for sure because it's wedged right now.
Not only that, but if this snaps in the back, it might actually bounce off the face.
Yep.
Before it might not just go straight down, it might actually bounce off the face because you'll have sort of centrifugal motion here, and then bounce out.
So it's going to damage the rock art as well.
Could damage the rock art as well.
When you see a site like V-Bar V, it's got natural features to it, natural geological features. So long before they carved any petroglyphs, they may have noticed certain features such as these shadows coming out from the gnomons that stick out. So what we're looking at is the evolution of a site rather than coming fully blown into existence. Very possibly, and I can't speak any more than guesswork on this, as time went on, they recognized more and more things about that site that were significant and eventually built their calendar. Maybe not necessarily at the beginning, but they fully understood it over time. And so adding to it over time, and how long that took is anybody's guess. But it would be very interesting to do more research on the timing of when these panels were cut and when they were fixed up. But basically, they re-engineered a site to suit the needs of that calendar, and it eventually became a very sacred site and one which must have had repeated occupancy and people coming there for ceremonial purposes at specific times of the year.
And when it hits winter solstice, it's at the very bottom of that opening. very bottom. And then as a result of that shape, it produces a dagger of that shape right on the ground, right at the base of this particular. The shadow starts when it hits across the top of that opening. It's around November 25th, something like that. That's when you start to see a very long but fuzzy dagger. And it's actually almost where Paul is standing, all the way to the end. Then as it gets lower and lower in it, that gets more defined and smaller and tighter. And when you get to the winter solstice, it's at the very, very bottom of that opening. And the dagger is extremely pointy and very defined. And the tip of it, when you're looking at the ground today, is out about 2 feet from these rocks that are to the left. And of course, if the dirt wasn't there, that dagger would have been against those rocks. And so the assumption is that maybe there's a concentric circle on those rocks, maybe 2 feet down below the surface. The next question, as part of that, is there's some rock at the base of that. Could they have put the rock there to mark that lowest spot? From the ground, you really can't tell. Up here, we're a little better. And it's hard to tell whether those are stacked up there, but they are layered. So when we were trying to figure out how did they know that today was the equinox or solstice in order to put the petroglyphs in the correct location, we decided to come to the mountain behind us, which is referred to as Sacred Mountain, because there's a ruin at the top of 60 rooms, a large plaza, and then at the base of it there's a ball court. So this suggests this was a very important space. And it's a very short walk over to the Verde Petroglyph Site. And the thought was that perhaps there was a sun watcher watching the horizon from that location, similar to how Hopis have been doing it for centuries. And so we hiked to the top on the equinox and the solstices and recorded the declination or rising point of the sun from that location. Over the span of the next year, we hiked to each of the 3 locations. So for example, this prominent point here is referred to as Deadwood Point, and that's exactly in line with the equinox sunrise. We hiked to the top of that and found a sun shrine of 2 cairns of stone remaining about 2 feet high and about 3 to 4 feet apart. And when you stood between the 2 cairns of stone, you'd be in a perfect alignment with Sacred Mountain to your back and to the sunrise at your face, as though they were creating a doorway for the sun to rise from the horizon and come through the doorway and enter the Sacred Mountain, sacred area. We found exactly the same structures at the summer solstice location and also at the winter solstice location, which proved to us that that Sacred Mountain location from which we were making our observations had in fact been the sun watcher position that was used by the Verde petroglyph makers for that calendar.
Out in the area kind of to the northwest of Sacred Mountain, there's a bunch of agricultural fields. You can see places where they've dammed up little gullies and where they've cleared rocks to make these little plots of land to farm. And so when you see, from a geological perspective, when you see a landscape that's been modified to suit human needs, this to me is a trigger. There's something going on, significant going on. And there's no way that Sacred Mountain is unrelated to VBRV. They're interconnected by some means. And on that ridge in between, where I found what looked like a plaza, again, this is something that needs to be mapped in more detail. And there's no end. Once you find something, it triggers all kinds of questions. So this probably once sat up in there somewhere, and it dropped down, and then they enhanced it.
They probably moved it somewhere and then put the rock in there to kind of...
It's possible that they put that rock. Yeah, that would make some sense.
The rock that's on top of it is probably a natural rock, though, too.
This could have fallen, but it may have been placed. That's kind of enigmatic.
The one on top of it, though, doesn't look like it's the same kind of rock.
No, see if it...
Looks like a different rock type.
Basalt.
Yeah, that's what I thought. It's not sandstone.
That's been placed there.
Yeah, it's been placed there. Yep. So the question is why? What purpose is it serving?
Well, it's certainly not holding it.
It's not shaped,
No.
but it may, does it make sense that they might put something just to help stabilize the rock, to kind of like a jamming rock?
Well, wedge, yeah, if it was wedged though, but it's not really serving a wedge purpose. It's not jammed in there. Wedges are usually jammed.
Yeah.
So, Ken,
A little tight.
on your interactions, do both these rocks participate in them?
Oh, it's all of the cutout parts right up to here.
Okay.
So the sun effect is from that bottom little loop all the way up, and it goes into here.
Okay.
And then this you don't see.
Okay.
So all of this throws a shadow in there about 2:30 or so.
Okay. And that then goes across the wall.
No, it just stops in. It goes on the interior here, and then as the sun keeps going west, it gets deeper in.
Okay.
Nothing ever gets on the wall.
Okay. What's the purpose of flaking this then? Is there any kind of...
There are, if you count them, there are 7 notches.
Oh, this is the one you think
Exactly.
is San Francisco Peaks.
Yeah. So that's the best I can come up with. 7. You've got these when you look at them this way, and then I've got a superimposed picture of the rocks, the San Francisco Peaks from Wapatki in the back. They match exactly the same.
From Wapatki?
From Wapatki, yeah. And in fact, see, even this little, even like this little notch here, even that, there's a little knob, not one of the 7, but you can see it from there. So it's almost like they've got every itty bitty little detail. And when you're looking at it from Wapatki, it kind of starts off like straight up, and then there's the 7 peaks, and then it tapers off, and that's exactly what this does.
One of the stones that we looked at very carefully was the long, thin, sharp, wedge-like stone that Ken feels that there's a pattern of the San Francisco Peaks. Paul and I's close examination of that stone reveals that indeed it was flaked. Those are not natural exfoliation scars. They are flaking scars, probably by direct percussion with a hammerstone. But there were actually a couple of instances, it looks to me like there was an antler tine used to flake the smaller flakes. And those flake scars are very characteristically circular and have smooth edges and have much smaller flake scars. And so there was both direct percussion with a hammerstone and direct percussion with a pressure flaker or an antler tine that was used to create those flake scars. And indeed, it also looks like that on some of the flaking scars that were done on the edge of the big vertical crack in the cliff face, there might have been some places where there was either indirect percussion or large antler tines used, because you could see the point of impact of where the flake was removed. So you have a nice long flake scar with feather terminations, and in some cases with step terminations because of greater force being applied. But in a few instances you could actually see where the antler tine was pressed in the pressure flake to also remove materials, to round the edges and to manipulate the shadow patterns.
This piece down in here appears to me, if I see the parallelism of this bed, probably was back inside and has pulled out
Yeah,
from that back
from there,
face there.
exactly, yeah.
I'm sure that matches up there perfectly.
Right. You know what's really interesting? It's an undulating flaking technique. It's been flaked in alternate sides, an undulating pattern, which is done to get better control of your margin. It's called a margin, so that you don't break off a big chunk. It's very typical of stone tool making to alternate the sides of your flake on your margin. So whoever did this obviously knew how to make stone tools.
Ken?
Ken, there's something else that intrigues me down here. Yeah. This spalling on this edge here could have been flaked.
To make it rounded like that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Here's your typical sharp edge, And this almost looks like,
That's the end of it there.
yeah,
Oh, right through there?
uh-huh. It goes from there to here. And these almost look like flake scars to me, along here. And a really good napper could, and same here,
Same on that side.
yeah. A really good napper could get a long flake off with a good blow up there. Well, yeah, it's definitely, I mean, this shadow is going to affect this, and a shadow on this is going to affect the whole face here.
This is what it should have looked like normally.
Yeah.
Originally,
Yeah.
so
What
it
about
came
down
to a,
below? Is that also enhanced or not?
Yeah, but this one looks more like it's ground than flaked. This here, you got your typical flake scars here. See where this is called termination? It's called a feather termination. And that's typically what happens. That means the blow is coming from up top, and then it thins out because the force dissipates as it goes through the stone. And so this is typical bottom of a flake like that.
it's kind of like a tapering effect.
Yeah, exactly.
Comes down.
Yeah, very clearly, both sides have been symmetrically shaped.
Yeah, you can see how they're alternating the.
It's beautiful. And they didn't do it up there where they could have. So they had some reason for doing it
Yeah,
here, but not up there.
right. As though the sun angle is coming here.
Although it's possible that this was a giant flake,
It is.
contemporaneous with these.
Well, and then is this then broke off here to allow the light to proceed on?
bet you're right. I missed that before.
Yeah. So, obviously this is, if there's light coming over here, it's going to be impeded by anything
Exactly.
sticking out here. So you would chunk this off so that you get your full.
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like it's a straight line there, so the edge was taken off.
See here, again, this is typical
You can
flake.
see the
See
end
how?
right there, yeah.
Yeah, that's a termination.
Another termination point.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
And this other flake is right here,
uh-huh.
And then up to there.
and there's probably the point of percussion.
Percussion there. Yeah.
Yep, indeed.
It looks pretty sharp there, yeah. Like
Yeah. And this, and by the way, this and this may be what's called indirect percussion. Do you know what I mean by that?
Tool? Yeah, they use a
a
tool.
tool. Like
Yeah.
And a hammerstone, yeah.
And a hammerstone. And you do that when you want to get greater force that you have control over. Because the problem is if you want to chunk this out
without
and
destroying it.
without destroying the whole edge here, you want to direct your force greater, and you're going to do that with your indirect percussion. Same with here. You want to get a big chunk,
Yeah.
so you have your indirect percussion,
So
and that's
they
going to
were
distribute.
well versed in how to do it. And
Oh,
not
of course.
Not just a blind blow. I mean,
Well, no, of course not. Keep in mind, these are people that make stone tools for a living.
right. Just amazing.
Wow, this is. Here you can see this. I think, wow. I think this particular spot right here is actually where a deer antler tine was used to flake it. This mark right here.
A what?
A deer antler tine,
We do it again.
right there. The reason being is you've got a very nice rounding in the flake scar itself, which is typical when you do your flaking with the tine and you do it very slow and you force it. You have better control over your flakes, so the flakes are smaller, but it also creates a slight ground effect, especially on something like sandstone, which is really easily friable. I would be almost willing to bet that's an antler tine mark there from being flaked. The reason I say this is because I'm an amateur napper myself. And so I've done a lot of the snapping, and I've seen the effects.
I only nap in the afternoon.
Between 1 and 3, you knew that was coming.
You got that on tape. Hello, Ken.
The discovery of the V-Bar-V solar calendar actually began a quest. to determine whether or not there were additional calendars within the Verde Valley. To have just one calendar by itself is not very convincing that the Sedona, in fact, actually did this kind of calendar. You need to have a pattern. And so over the preceding 5 years, I have now documented over 12 solar calendars so far. Among these are a sun watcher seat that was discovered at the Honanki Heritage Site. In addition, there are 2 calendars at the Pulaski Heritage Site. One is a large sun shield that is marked on the equinox. Another is a sun watcher station that has an image of the opposing horizon that is marked with black triangles to indicate the winter solstice, the 2 equinoxes, and a large ball to represent where the sun rises on the summer solstice. Another interesting site is in Rarick Canyon with a large boulder that contains a large spiral of 13 rings. This spiral is bisected on the solstices and the equinoxes.
The scaffolding project has been a huge success in my mind, allowing a much closer inspection. The results of our examination have revealed that there was a considerable amount of modification to the cliff face and to existing glyphs that would have never have been recognized without having the scaffolding and being able to get up very close and examining them, the scars and the cracks and the glyphs themselves to determine all the human enhancements that were done.
Yeah, when we had the opportunity to look at the V site up close on the scaffold, it gave us an opportunity to really get up close, we literally to almost touch the rock and see it. And that brought a whole bunch of surprises. The 2 gnomons that stick out and make the shadows for the summer solstice are clearly rocks that have broken away from a fracture plane. Those particular gnomons were natural rocks that had moved out on their own accord, and the Indians took advantage of that. And what they did, they had scaffolds too. They jammed river rocks in there, and not just typical river rocks. They were hard quartzites, very, very durable quartzites and cherts. And they were jammed in place so that these rocks were stabilized. And that was a surprise because you couldn't see that from the ground looking up, which meant that they not only understood that these were capable of falling out on their own accord, but they had to do something to maintain them, and they did an excellent job of jamming rocks and preventing them from coming loose.
The other thing that struck me is there was quite a bit of flaking that took place near the top of the rock art, especially around the 2 or 3 gnomons. One of the flaking patterns was along a vertical crack at the edge, had been flaked off to round it on both sides, which would have affected the shadow patterns and the light process. And also I noticed that there was pecking that took place along some of the natural cracks to widen those cracks so that they're more pronounced. And those widened cracks appeared to be part of the narrative or part of the communications that was going on involving other glyphs.
What triggers these sites is not just acceptance of a past panel, that this is a petroglyph panel. It has astronomical significance. It has maybe many ages of reoccupation and retouching up, if you will. We still need to learn more about these sites, and that's still in the future.
One of the other things that the geologist Paul and I noticed is that some of the circular depressions do appear to be man-made and are not bullet holes. And in fact, when you look closely at the pecking patterns and the flake scars, because there appears to have been a little bit of flaking that might have taken place, in some instances you could actually see the direction in which the tool was used. Some of the holes were worked from the bottom up, and some of the holes were worked from the top down. And of the holes that we inspected from the scaffolding, it clearly indicates that they would have had a scaffold or a ladder to be high enough on the cliff face to be able to create those holes. So that is further evidence that there was a manipulation of the face of the cliff to create different kinds of designs that were part of the story. While on the scaffolding, it allowed us to get a closer view of some of the petroglyphs themselves, and we did notice that some of the deeply pecked elements appear to have been indirect pecking, where there was an intermediate tool with the hammerstone, because they're very deep, they're very sharp holes, and there was a significant force used to create the depressions, almost a speckled depressions that would probably take an indirect percussion to do that kind of pattern. We also noticed that in several instances there were glyphs that had been repecked, or in some cases the bodies of animals or anthropomorphs had been pecked deeper than the original pecking, so that you had depressions that were fresher looking, that had less patination, indicating that they had been pecked later than the original design. We also noticed that there were some cracks of exfoliation that were small ledges where the stone had exfoliated off the cliff face, and those apparently had been enhanced as well. And one of the theories is that cracks in rocks represent portals or entryway into the stones themselves, because there are some beliefs that the stones are the homes to certain spirits, certain supernatural beings. And so the crack or even a pecked hole, and you did note that there were some unusual pecked holes that almost looked like a vortex into the stone itself. Both the cracks and those pecked holes could, we theorize, represent an entryway for the spirits to go into the stone and to come out of the stone. And if the prehistoric people were putting glyphs and petroglyphs that are representation of different important deities or spirits to them, it would be consistent with that idea that they are also creating paths of travel. And if you have a natural crack that's in the stone itself and they're enhancing it, perhaps that is a way to increase the ability of the spirits to go in and out of that stone. And it might also be part of the story of the spirit traveling from one world to the next. It may not even be that stone itself, but might be a metaphor or a symbol of the nature of travel between this world and the next world.
The idea of a connection through the underworld and connection through the earth to a distant site, I think, is very, very meaningful. That central fracture where it's all been flaked off and sculptured into a profile of a mountain, Todd believes that that's perhaps a Coconino figure with a stone on the top like a head and so on. And I think there's a lot of credence to that it could well be real. It's a connection not only to the underworld, but a connection to the plateau and the association between the Hopi on the plateau and the people living down in the valley. In a way, it's like our modern communication system where we talk to one another. This is conversation through the inner workings of the earth.
It's fairly clear to us that think about what the meanings of these things might be. The enhancement of the natural qualities of a stone are part of the story that's being told. It's not just an arbitrary process, it's intentional, and it may well have to do with some kind of travel, either into other worlds or into the stone, or just as a metaphor of traveling in general.
The 2-year study of the solar calendar at the Verde Heritage Site demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of light and shadow and their interplay with the petroglyphs across the panel. What we could not tell from the base, of course, was whether the boulders above that created the effect were in fact natural or man-made or manufactured in some way. As my colleagues have described, what we found was that the rocks were in fact natural, although they have been modified to some extent to create certain desired effects. In addition, we discovered that stone wedges were placed between the rocks to hold them in place so that their effect would not be compromised over time. In this study, what we eventually discovered was that these people were very sophisticated observers of their natural surroundings, to the effect that we have now found 10 solar calendars throughout the Verde Valley. With the number of astronomical sites in the Verde Valley, it's quite obvious that these calendars were an integral part of their culture, linking the mystical, ritual, and agricultural phases and cycles of their year. These were sophisticated observers of their natural surroundings, and it brought order to an otherwise disorderly world. With more than 100 images on the solar panel alone at the Verde site, we're only now beginning to understand just a small percentage of these images and what they meant, and also trying to understand the intent of their creators.
Howdy, Todd.
Hi. Are you writing all this down, Ken?
I'm hoping the camera...
That's why he brought me along.
Oh, okay, good. So you'll do a transcription, huh?
Remember to put batteries?
Got a photographer down below.
Well, I can see what looks like a spiral.
And there's another one to the left. Now,
Okay.
we had a Hopi here, and there's kind of an outline. He said it was a Katsina protecting, this is where evil spirits come out of this crack. And so he's protecting us from that.
It looks to me, Ken, like your deer over here, its body has been repacked.
Which deer?
The deer or the mountain sheep,
Right above the sheep?
the quadruped over here above your concentric circles.
Oh,
The body has been pecked after or enhanced after the original pecking. It's much fresher and it looks like it's bigger size pecking marks.
Higher on the pecking order.
There's a comedian in every crowd, right?
With him many times.
and then now this one, this tall one, a group of Zuni came to the site. The Zuni got real excited when they saw that because they said they had never seen that in a petroglyph, that Katsina spirit. And when I was digging around, I found one, Alexander Steffens referred to one Katsina figure where it was an exorcism Katsina. And as part of that ceremony, he would remove his left moccasin and stamp the ground to release the spirit. So here, his left foot, if he's facing you, has got toes exposed.
Oh,
the right one
yeah.
doesn't. And right above his exposed toe is this ball. So is that a spirit being released? Now it's in the Alexander Steffens journal, actually in a footnote. But he says that the Hopi do the same ceremony with the Zuni, and the Zuni performs the same ceremony with this exorcism Katsina. So I don't know if it is or not. And then we had a professor from Southern Illinois University, and he didn't give me his name. And he was studying this for about an hour. He was drawing it, picturing it. And he said, did you notice that these images are all in a spiral pattern? It starts over at the edge here, comes down, there's a quadruped, something there, kind of a star, something going on, a shaman, something like a badger foot, something up there, it's kind of like a circle with a line, across, then this this guy here, and then you come inside. and
Maze,
you
I
follow
call those
around.
mazes.
Mazes,
Yeah.
yeah. So he found this as a storyline in a spiral pattern.
Interesting.
Guess I
One
have
way to
get
get
your
up in the
picture,
world.
Huh? If you fill us will believe it.
I've been an old second-story man for all my life.
Oh, no more jokes, not today.